difference between wants and needs, because I really believe that people get them mixed up. And I think you need some ways of trying to differentiate between something that you want and something that you need. Now, I know you can come back to me and you can say, well, I want to have my needs fulfilled, all right, which is legitimate. Or I need to have some of those things that I want in order to be happy, right? You might say that. However, let's get real for a minute. What is a need? What is a need? Goodness, you have so many needs, right? Let's talk about some of the basic needs that you have, all right? Real down-to-earth basic needs. You need light, you need air, you need water, you need nutrition, right? You need calories. Whether you believe it or not, you do need some. Okay. A lot of people just have a hard time accepting that as a truth, but it is true. Yes, you do need those things. All right. Those are the basic ingredients for your body. Okay, in terms of basically that we're talking about in order for your body as an individual entity, if you want to momentarily separate it from all other things, there's certain things that your body needs. It needs exercise, okay? It needs to be bathed. It needs to be kept clean. It needs to be groomed. It needs to be respected, all right? That's a need, by the way. It's not something that is exclusive to I either like it or I don't, but your body certainly does need to be respected. It may also want that, but it doesn't always get it, okay? We're talking about purely biological needs, right now. Then we get into another area, all right? Then we get into the area of needing on the psychological level, if you like. All right, let's talk about some of those, what kinds of things you need there. One that might immediately come to your mind is love. Right? I haven't seen anybody shake their head for that one. All right. You need love. You need recognition. All right. That's something that I don't think that very many people are attuned to consciously, yet they strive for it constantly. Recognition. Other things you need on the psychological level are things such as security, in other words, knowing that you are safe, and in today's world that isn't always readily available. You need to be accepted. You need to be appreciated. You also need to have your individuality. And we could probably go on and on ad infinitum. Can anybody think of anything that I haven't said yet?
Stimulation.
Stimulation, yes. Psychological stimulation depends on the kind of stimulation you're talking about. Some kinds of stimulation we definitely don't need. Okay? It's like what is happening in Argentina right now, right? We don't need that. All right, so there are, certain kinds of mental stimulation, but psychological needs. Okay. Now here's where these two elements of our selves, our physical and psychological selves, come together. Because in order for the body to be healthy, the mind has to be healthy, the psychology of the individual has to be healthy. So obviously we need to be healthy psychologically in order to be able to survive, not just psychologically, but physiologically as well. I'm going to make a statement here that I think is very relevant, and a lot of people really kind of don't understand this. They seem to somehow superimpose it into a lot of theories that they talk about, but it isn't really understood and it isn't talked about in the way that it should be. And that is that when it comes to meeting a psychological need or a physiological need, what is priority one? Do you know? In other words, if the subconscious had to choose between the survival of the physical self or the psychological self, which would it choose?
Wouldn't it be physical?
No, it definitely would not. The physical body is less than priority. I'm not saying that it isn't taken care of by the subconscious. Of course it is. It's one of its most important survival tactics, of course, is to make sure the body has all that it needs. However, if it becomes a question of either or, invariably it is the psyche of the individual that is protected. Very frankly, and to put it very crudely, the body can go to hell. And it does, doesn't it? In many, many cases, it does do that. So that would tell you something. I've seen, when I've worked with many, many people, I see this all the time. A person could be really in a state of a very dangerous physical state. Their lives are actually threatened by something they're doing, overeating or smoking too much or drinking too much or whatever they're doing. Okay. But because whatever they're doing fills a psychological need, the body suffers, you see. And this tells you something about what we're talking about in terms of need. We also have emotional needs in terms of, and let's separate them for a moment from the psychological stuff, because when we talk about psychological, we're really talking about emotional, mental kinds of things. But let's divide it up a little bit right now so that you can understand this a little bit. When I'm talking about emotional needs, okay, we talked about needing love, all right? But we also have some intertwining needs that are emotional and physical at the same time when it comes to being touched, or sometimes not being touched. All right? Those kinds of things. Emotional needs for reassurance, for caring, all of those kinds of things have to touch our emotions. Our emotions need that in order to grow and to be mature and to develop. Okay, so we see this happening. You know, if you take it from a very tiny infant that just comes into the world, and we've seen what happens to those infants when they are not touched, when they're not given the emotional warmth that they need. They're not given the touching and the talking and the caressing that a normal mother-baby relationship requires. Very often, the child does not develop mentally. The brain doesn't develop. It's so vital to our survival. So, of course, we do need it. We also have mental needs, okay? Needs was, Shirley just pointed out, was for stimulation. We have the need to be mentally stimulated. Not overstimulated, obviously, because that can be too much stress, but to have enough mental stimulation to be able to maintain attention with something or to maintain control of our own thinking and so on and so forth. So those are kinds of things that we're talking about now as relative to needs. Certain things that we absolutely have to have for our physical, mental, and emotional survival. Now, if we try to separate those from what I want, all right, then we can begin to do that, because we can also say, what do I need? Whenever we want to find out whether we want it or need it, a good question to ask ourselves is, how important is it to my physical or psychological survival? Right? An excellent question, because when you stop and think about that, many times when you have said that you really want something, you have wanted it from way down here in your chest someplace, you know? I really want that. All right? Now, how does something that I want, which is a very kind of, if you want, a desire, an urge for something, get caught up with an emotion that is so strong that we are forced to go after it exactly as though we needed it? In other words, it's important to our survival. Now, in order to find out why we might do that, we probably have to go back a very long way. We have to go back to what we were educated to believe is necessary in order to be a whole and complete person in our society. Okay? In other words, in our society, certain kinds of symbols of status, recognition, acceptance, and so on and so forth, have taken on material kinds of things, all right, in terms of a person might say, I need a Cadillac, all right. Now, you don't need a Cadillac in the sense that you need transportation. Okay, if I want to get from here to there, I might need transportation, obviously, if I can't walk it, you see, and there are no buses of any kind or no other kinds of transportation, then I certainly need a vehicle. All right. But I do not need a Cadillac to get me from here to there. However, in order for me, if I was status conscious or my job required that I portray a certain image, then I might very well need a Cadillac, you see, to be able to get me from here to there, because that's not all I need it for. I don't just need transportation. Here is where they get involved, is the need for recognition and acceptance gets tied up then with I want, you see. And that's where many, many times we run into these kinds of problems. A lot of times I say to people when they first come in to see me, and it really often, very often stumps them. I've looked through their forms, and sometimes I can tell they really don't know what they're doing here. I mean, you know there's something that brought them here. They might want to stop smoking or stop drinking, or they might want to get off of drugs, or they might want to be more confident, or they might want to lose weight, or whatever the situation is. And I look over their forms, and I don't see what this person really wants. And I can only see what they need, but unless I can make them want that, I'm not going to get very far. So quite often I will point blank ask them, what do you want? And then watch this. Whichever hemisphere they access to get that answer is where I get my clue. Okay? If they access the right hemisphere, I know that they want emotion, something for their emotions. If they access their left hemisphere, I know that they want something else for their intellect. They want it for some other thing. That's how I can get in touch with. That's just one of the ways. But the thing is that so few people know the difference between what they want and what they need. Of course, the subconscious knows what you need in terms of your physical and psychological survival. But many people ask me, and this is a very legitimate question, can the subconscious be wrong? It isn't wrong so much as it isn't always right. If you understand, do you understand the difference there? It's like somebody said to me not too long ago, a question about, could I be lying to myself? And I said, no, I just don't think you're telling yourself the truth. It's that kind of thing. That I have certain things that I want and that I need and that I have developed emotions about that immediately start to have a very powerful powerful on my consciousness, okay? Now, there are certain things that we do need in order to, obviously, to feel like we've found a place in our society, okay? If we feel like an outcast in some way of our society, because we do not have all the things that the people in our society are supposed to have in order to be accepted as decent citizens and, contributing citizens and all that sort of thing. You see, we could very often lie awake in bed and just want those things so badly, you see. And somebody who is very, very pious might come along and say, well, you just want those things, you don't need them, you see. But yes, indeed, in a society that has created, as our society has created, a great many needs, and it really has, if you think about it, it has created tremendously powerful needs in people to meet certain demands of itself, of society, that says in order to be somebody, you see, which means recognition, which means some form of love and acceptance. If you don't have those things, you're not going to get it. And you're going to think, oh, well, of course, that's all very superficial and that's not real. And real people don't want that. Real people are not interested in material things, right? Wrong. Real people are just as interested in material things as unreal people, okay? Simply because they are very much in tune, you see, with the facts of our society as it has been kind of laid out for us over generations now. I think that what we have to do at this point is, in learning what is a true need for survival, is determine, first of all, what do I as an individual need, all right? Now, needs change, wants change. If you can kind of go back a little bit into your own history and think about the things that were very important to you, your own value systems perhaps 10 years, or even only 5 years ago, and you will see a very serious change over that period of time in your value systems. At the time when you were experiencing those other value systems, that was all there was. And they filled your consciousness, and they had a great deal of pull on your consciousness so that you strove to get those things. Now, how did your value system change? How did it change? What made it change? Did getting some of those things prove something to you? Or not getting some of those things prove something to you? In other words, say for example, 5 years ago, if your value system said that in order to be really happy, I got to move out of this little house and I got to move into a bigger house that has this, that, and the other in it, and then I'm going to be really happy, you see. And then you do that, and it takes you all of that time, maybe 3 or 4 years, to find that house and to move in and make it the way you want it, and you go, is this what I wanted? Is this what it took? And you might say, yes, I'm very happy here, this is what I needed, and now I can go on to other things. Or you might find out that no, that's not really what it was after all. Or maybe that was a very temporary thing, and once you started to strive for it, it became less and less important, so once you had it, it lost its value for you. There's a lot of ways that can happen. By the same token, if you couldn't have moved into that nice big house and done all the things you wanted to do in it, and you're still in the small house, your value system could still change. You could have realized that, I guess, doesn't matter. There's other things, you see. So the constant flexing and changing of what our needs are and what our wants are often means we are doing some growing, and we're doing some learning. And one of the interesting things about that is, if you say to a person, what were you doing about 2 years ago about this time? All right, approximately. Most people would really have to stop and think very hard. I don't mean about necessarily this time of year, but about 2 years ago, what was going on in your life, and what seemed to be an all-important endeavor, or what seemed to be a thing that kind of guided you forward. And then ask yourself, is it still there? Now, if it is still there, obviously, it's a need. If it's not still there, it could very well have been a want. You see, because other things fill places of wants, where other things will not fill places of need. And that is one of the things you have to understand. If I really need something, okay, for my psychological or my physiological survival, and I don't get it, I'm going to keep on striving for that. However, if it's something that I merely want, that can change. It can change simply because as I strive for what I need, my wants will change, because I realize, that those things are transitory in many respects. People sometimes come in and they will tell me something that they have always wanted. One of the questions on the questionnaire that people fill out for me when they come to see me privately is, I secretly. And that's incredible. What they want secretly, secretly is a want. All right? I secretly want to be a famous singer. I secretly want to be this or that. All right? And then if you say to them, is it really just a want? If you've always wanted to be a singer, if you've always wanted to be a dancer or whatever it was, I had a young man in my office the other day, two secrets as a matter of fact. He always wants to be a world-famous chef and a famous singer. I said, we'll call you the singing chef and it'll be great, okay? But the thing is when we started talking about the difference between whether or not he needed that or if he just wanted that, it really boiled down to, yes, he needed that, not for just being a singer, not for being a famous chef, but for getting the recognition. And for him, having been around a lot of people who were successful in show business and in the restaurant business, that's the way he perceived to get it. You see? I have to be famous, a singer, or I have to be a famous chef in order to have the things that I need. So it got boiled down to a want, a secret want, and there is nothing wrong with wanting these things, but it's the length of time, the duration, okay, of how long you want or need this for, that is a very important clue into how important it is into the whole scheme of things in your life. Now, if you go back all the way to when you were a little kid, right, all the way back, a little kid, and do you remember sitting up nights or sitting idling into yourself and thinking about what you were going to be when you grew up? Some of the things that you thought about were perhaps, at that time, somewhat fantastic. Quite a lot of little girls wanted to be a nurse. Quite a lot of little boys wanted to be a doctor, or a fireman, or whatever you want to call it. They were looking for what they believed would get them recognition and a place of worth in society. You see? Because they looked at these kinds of professions in certain ways. But a child, you see, doesn't know consciously that they're looking for this recognition. And also they're not consciously aware that they need that acceptance. So when Mommy talks to Johnny and she says, Johnny, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he says, well, I want to be a doctor. Oh, Mama bristles with pride. Well, that's wonderful, Johnny. You'll grow up and be a doctor. However, if Johnny said, I'd like to be a garbage man, she'd say, well, Johnny, of course not. Which would mean you mustn't want anything that isn't acceptable to everybody else, you see. And so this is how we begin to weave the want and need together. And sometimes it is very difficult at the first glance to tell exactly what it is. All right. Certain things about our environment are very important to us because of the effect that they have on us. And we might say consciously that we just want it. All right. Like colors. All right. You might have a desire or a need for a certain color in your environment at a certain time. I don't know if all the ladies here will probably know this, but do you know that you go through periods of time when certain colors, when you're shopping for clothes, just draw you and you end up buying a whole bunch of things that are all one color? You get home and say, I've got nothing but blue in my wardrobe, or I've got nothing but pink, or whatever. Okay, you think, I wanted that. It was the one that but what it is that color has a very symbolic reference for you. It fills a need. You see. And it's very important to understand that. You don't just want it because it's pink. You want it because pink represents something to you on a symbolic level, so you want that. Now, there was a time that I went through many, many years ago where the only color that I could be happy with, it seemed like the only color that I just fell in love with, I wanted it all around me, I had furniture and everything, lavender. It was what I wanted. It was that lavender color that some people have seen me wear sometimes, all right? Now, the interesting thing about the lavender at that time was when I did a dialogue with my subconscious, because after a while I opened my closet and I got nothing but lavender in there, and it looks like I'm wearing the same thing all the time. I sat down and I talked to my subconscious and I said, what is this lavender? And my subconscious says, well, what happens when you mix black and blue together? And what it represented was my bruised psyche, my bruised soul, if you will. At that time, I was feeling a lot of hurt. And I was wearing that. You've seen a black and blue bruise, haven't you? It's just as pure, pretty a lavender color as you could ask for, right? And then other times, and you can be going through a blue period or a pink period or a red period or something like that. And the same thing, you can be very, very content in your home, okay, for a while. And all of a sudden, you want to change it. You say, you don't need new furniture, but you want, okay, you say, I want new furniture. Well, you announce to your husband or your spouse, I want new furniture. You've got to be crazy. That stuff's not that old. You know, you won't be able to get a good price for that, secondhand or whatever. But I really feel I want this other color. I'm not comfortable with this color anymore. So the thing is that obviously there's been a change in your internal environment that tells you that you need something else on the exterior as well. And there's a lot of these kinds of things, and little clues are telling you what the true need is that often evokes the want. Okay, what is basically a want then? When I want something, how can I actually determine whether I really want it or I need it? Now, the first question I gave you is very valid. How important is it to my physical and psychological survival? Another question when it comes to a want to ask is, what would I do if I didn't have it? Very simple question. What would I do, or how would I feel if I didn't have it? You might be like the little kid in the cartoon that says, I'll scream and scream till I make myself sick. Okay, I'm going to throw a tantrum, I'm going to get it somehow. Or you might say, well, I guess, as much as I might really want it, I guess I can manage without it. It isn't going to be the end of the world. I might be disappointed if I don't get it, but I am not going to be so shaken and so broken from it that I can't move a step forward in my life, you see. So what would I do without it, or how would I feel without it, is a good question to really determine, at least to begin with, the difference between a want and a need. A want also comes from a lot of other kinds of information that comes into you. And this is where, in our society today, we have a great deal of problems. The media is constantly inundating your psyche with all that you can have. You can afford this, you can have that. All you got to do is have a little plastic card and the world's yours, right? And you can have anything. And this is one of the things that has happened. They also attempt, by the psychological manipulation that they do of your mind in commercials, to make you need it to. Okay? To make you need it, so that those two things, when they get gripped together, the want and the need, you're going to go out and buy that. Okay? At some point. You see? So that you have to understand that the information that comes to you, I mean, you watch television. I caught a little bit of television last night. I'm hungry for love. I'm hungry for some kind of satisfaction. I'm hungry for some stimulation to my senses. The commercial would be enough for me, I tell you. Most of the time when I see those things, I don't know how anybody can watch television for several hours in a row. It's the most hypnotic medium there is. A very dangerous medium because of it. The whole thing is that they make you not just want it, but they also evoke a need in there, you see. Now, if you take a little basic fact into your consciousness and dwell on it for a minute, how many times have you heard someone complaining about the price of food in the supermarket? Right? You probably do it too. Every time you go to the checkout, or every time you pick something up, you say, oh my God, again. And by the time you see the end results, you check, you realize that, this is a pretty expensive business, and you complain a great deal. Okay? However, do you complain about the price of a new television if yours is broken down? Do you complain about the price of any piece of equipment that is not necessary to your survival, like you do about groceries? Be honest with yourself. No, I bet you don't. What does that tell you about yourself? How much your needs and wants have gotten mixed up. That you need food to survive. Obviously. I'm sure a lot of the things that you buy at the grocery store have absolutely nothing to do with survival. Let's face it. A lot of it has to do with your imminent death if you don't watch out, okay? But the point is that it is considered to be necessary. All right? But I have seen people literally almost tear each other apart to get into a white sale or to get into an appliance store because they just happen to have a sale on, you see. Whether they need it or not, it happens to be on sale. So there's a great deal that is done by the media to confuse these issues. And I think it will pay you to really and truly kind of organize in your mind for your own sake what is necessary. Now, because you have developed, as you have, you're all mind masters, and you have developed a great deal of awareness and control that the average person, if you want to use the term average, that you might meet on the street does not have. Okay? And therefore you are able to really and truly get into yourself and understand the difference between your own individual wants and individual needs. Once you've determined for yourself how important it is to you in the whole scheme of things, you see. In other words, do I need this in order to be happy, to feel complete? Now, I'm not going to get into, well, maybe I should get into that a little bit, because a lot of people will say, well, if a person says I need, say, for example, a $150,000 house instead of a $45,000 house in order to be happy, you might say, well, maybe their value system is a little bit distorted. Okay. But you also have to understand that in our society, the value systems are educated to believe one must continue to climb, one must continue to grow and expand and improve one's status in society. Okay, people who are usually content to just be where they are for any length of time, you see. It's like somebody who's lived in the old neighborhood for 40 years, you see. There's a part of people that will say, those people lived in that neighborhood 40 years, they never changed. They went the same old thing day in and day out, you see. Now, in the old days, that used to be considered stability. In today's standards, that's considered stupidity. Because you are supposed to, by the nature of the system today, to continue to strive upward, you see, in order to be going back to that acceptable, that, lovable even. Okay, look at how many people are in show business. How many people will literally, physically starve themselves to stay in Hollywood or to stay in New York and try to make a name for themselves in theater of some kind or in television or in Hollywood. They need that psychological applause. They need that reinforcement from their society, from the people on the outside of them, to say that they are worthwhile and they are good. And that's what a big house might be for some people, or a Cadillac for other people, you see, is that recognition and that reward, the acceptance and the love. What happens to many of these movie stars who fall out of the limelight for some reason? How many of them commit suicide? How many of them become degenerate in some way because they no longer get that constant reinforcement that you're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're special, you see. And we produce in modern days a tremendous number of people in show business. I would say about maybe 80% of them are unemployed. But they still strive for that, you see. And they need that big house in Hollywood. They need that in order to support the fact that they are now recognized, you see. So we can't really, in many cases, separate it. When a person is properly integrated, all right, in terms of having a good mental and emotional, physiological integration, they know then what they want, and they know then what they need, and they also know how to get it. Now, shall we talk about how to get it? You really like that, huh? Okay. First of all, once you've defined the difference between a genuine need, okay, and something that you just want. And I shouldn't say just want, because you're entitled to want anything you want, okay, but you have to know how important it is to you. Once you've determined that, think about, first of all the things that you have achieved so far. All right? How many things have you so far accomplished in your life? That's good building material. All right? How did I get all those things? What did I do to meet those needs or meet those wants at those times? What tools did I use? What ways of thinking or acting or being did I use to achieve this? And if I didn't get what I wanted and I didn't get what I needed, what did I do that might have made it impossible for me to do that? So evaluating how you performed in the past in taking care of needs and wants can be very beneficial, because you can see from your own past performance what you did that worked and what you didn't that didn't work, you see. Also now, because you have the mind mastery techniques, you know your subconscious is a fabulous resource for you. And this is one technique also not only to determine whether it's a true want or a true need, but also to find out how to meet it. First of all is do a dialogue with your subconscious, as I've taught you to do, and ask for details about this. Do I need this, or do I just want it? And let your subconscious really communicate with you on that, because it's got plenty of material to work from. And that can be very, very beneficial to you. Once you have determined one thing or another about it, then communicate to your subconscious that you need a solution to the problem of meeting that need or fulfilling that want. Your subconscious is very capable of coming up. Now, don't expect always immediately that it's going to have instantly an answer for you. All right? It may take a while for it to search out its resources and organize them in such a way as to be able to answer your question realistically. All right? Another way that you can do this is to observe other people who have achieved these things. What do they do? What is it that, say, the fellow next door who seems to be very contented, what did he do to achieve this? I'm not suggesting necessarily that his technique is the one that you should use, but you can certainly get a perspective from that, because what works for one person may not work for somebody else. But of viewing other people who are successful in meeting their needs and fulfilling their wants really gives you some insight. One of the things that I used to do a great deal of reading was biographies, particularly autobiographies, because written by the person, they're always much better. You know, if you get it secondhand, it's a little bit of, quite often, literary license is taken in those. But I've read a lot of those, and I have found that how other people did it maybe didn't teach me so much how to do it, but maybe how not to do it, or that one thing that almost invariably comes across in many of these cases is that if they really want it or they really need it, they don't give up. You see, otherwise they wouldn't be in a position to have written a biography that everybody reads, all right? So there's something that you can learn from that. Another thing that I think that is very useful to do is going into hypnosis, you see. And you all know how to do that. Going into hypnosis and searching for different avenues of meeting these particular needs or fulfilling your wants. Remember, though, that a lot of times there is a tendency for people to get stuck in a visualization process using their hypnosis. That is an attempt at meeting the need immediately. In other words, I want to have that Cadillac, so I imagine myself riding around in a Cadillac. That isn't going to do it. No way. That was never going to get you a Cadillac, if that's what you want, or if that's what you need. What will get you a Cadillac is to visualize yourself doing all the things that make a purchase of a Cadillac possible for you. Either working harder physically, putting more hours in at work, getting an extra job, or saving more, or doing something But you have to see yourself doing that, you see. You can't just fantasize yourself into a Cadillac. It just doesn't work. You have to take the steps. But once you've visualized yourself taking those steps, you see, one of the things that happens, and this is very important to remember about any need or any want, that once we begin to meet the need, even if it's not fully, or fulfill the want, we immediately begin to feel satisfied, even if we haven't got it yet. And that's interesting. Once we know that we are on the way, we feel more comfortable. I'm going to get it. Of course, if you remember when you were a baby, I don't know if you remember this when you were a baby, but if you've had babies around, you know this. The baby doesn't stop crying until you put the bottle in its mouth. Right? You can be saying, it's okay, honey, I'm getting it, right? But the baby doesn't stop crying. However, by the time you reach adulthood, you know when that bottle's coming. You know when that need is going to be met, because you're doing it yourself. You had to rely on somebody else before, okay? You don't have to rely on anybody else now. You know, and there's something very quieting, very comforting about knowing I am doing the things that I need to do, you see, to fill my needs and to make my wants satisfactory for me. In other words, to be satisfied. And that is a very important thing too. Satisfaction. Okay? The satisfaction should always come from knowing that somewhere within you, you have the resources to achieve everything you set out to do. And therefore, all of your wants and all of your needs will eventually be taken care of one way or another. Either if it was a want, it will go away and something else will replace it. Or if it's a need, you will strive continuously to meet it until you do. And you will know when you're beginning to meet that need. You know when you're on the right track. Everybody does, don't they? Somehow inside you feel it. And you begin to settle down, and even before you have it, you see, you begin to feel more secure because that need, you know, is going to be met. Of course, you always feel probably some feelings of satisfaction once the need has been met. But you see, here's something else that's different between wants and needs. Very often, a want, once it is fulfilled, may make you elated temporarily. It may satisfy you, or sometimes it's an anticlimax. But once a need is met, you are totally fulfilled. There is not a letdown. There isn't a temporary feeling about it at all. You see, it's like if you want a hug from somebody that you love, you see. When you see them coming towards you, immediately you start, and their arms are open to you, you start softening up and you're already feeling my need's going to be met. I feel good, right? And once they've got their arms around you and they're hugging you, you see, you're totally satisfied. But if it's something that you need, that you want, you see, it may not satisfy you that much. If it's that superficial kind of want that is a temporary thing, a transitory thing. Now, since we all have a variety of wants, and I'm not saying what ones are ideal, I mean everybody has to sort out what they want for themselves. You might want early American, I might want French country or something like that. That's what I want because that's what I'm comfortable with. You want the colonial because, or early American because that's what you're comfortable with, you see. But by the same token, if somebody offered you a free house full of French country furniture, you see, and you'd really wanted colonial, well, you're going to say, you're going to say, no, I don't want that. Don't give it to me. Give it to somebody else because I wanted colonial. Would you? No, you wouldn't. You'd take the whole house full of free country and you would be very satisfied. okay, that's how you can tell. You see? Because needs are very basic. The difference also in a need, a genuine need, an emotional need, let's say, is that it requires attention constantly. A want does not. Unless, of course, a person has an obsession of some kind with it. All right? But a want doesn't constantly occupy your consciousness, does it? It comes in now and then, you see. But a need will almost invariably sneak its way into your consciousness all the time. You know that because you've been there, right? I need so-and-so to call. Oh, I wish you would call. I want him to call. You do everything, right? And it just can't get it out of your mind. And this is the interesting thing, and everybody here who's been in my weight control seminar knows this, that when you reach for food a lot of times, the reason you're not satisfied when you eat it is because it didn't fill the need. Right? So you immediately know, that's not what I needed. You go in the cupboard and look for something else. And that isn't it either. But you learn to find out what it is you need. And once you do, you no longer get it mixed up with I want. The person will say, oh, I really could do with a banana split right now. Do you really want one of those? Yeah, I really want one of those. Okay. Sometimes they'll even say, I need a banana split. Now, who needs a banana split? I mean, let's face it. All right? But that is a representation of something else, a symbol for something else. And many, many of the things that we voice as wants or desires are really things that symbolize something that we need, or are associations for something that we need. So we have to be able to go within ourselves, and we have to be able to sort it out and understand as fully as possible the difference between what I want and what I need. And once, of course, if it's something that you need, and people will say to me, well, what if I can't get it? And that's a very legitimate question. What if I find out what I really need and I can't get it? And that is that sometimes, you know, it's the question that I say to the person, I put back onto the person then, okay, what if you don't get it? And somehow they know they will survive anyway. They may not like it so much, their survival may not be as inviting to them as if the need were possible to fulfill. However, I do believe that in many ways that we can literally meet all of our needs once we've learned to be more creative about them. You see, it all goes back to that very basic thing that we talked about before. Right? Survival. And I talk to a lot of people more about not just survival but recovery. Okay, a lot of people tell me that they have survived this and they have survived that, but they haven't fully recovered from it either, otherwise they wouldn't be here, you see. But I think that when you understand that there are many things that if you're willing to open up to your own creative resources and to all of the possibilities that life offers you, you will find many ways of meeting that need, you see. If you just, for example, what if you need to be loved and you're married to somebody who doesn't love you or doesn't show love to you? All right? So you say, what do I do? Well, certainly that is a problem. But all problems can somehow be resolved. Either you choose not to stay married to a person who doesn't love you, or you attempt to teach that person how to express love or to show it, or you find it someplace else. And that sounds a little simple, doesn't it? but it's true. You're going to find it someplace else because you need it. And if you keep looking in the same place all the time for the same thing, you're going to miss out on a lot. You really are. That's the whole key, you see, to finding fulfillment of needs. That when a person says, but what if I can't? I want that person to love me. You see, I need that person to love me. No, you do not need that person to love you, because if that person, usually you've survived somehow without that person loving you. Therefore, you see, you're still okay. So you have to understand that it's your survival. It goes right back to your survival. Therefore, apparently, I really don't need that person to love me. I need somebody to love me, and I'm going to go out and find somebody to love me. You see. And the world is full of possibilities and potentials. Often we focus so narrowly in the way we want and the way we need that we tend to look in a single direction for the answers. And one of the reasons I think that happens is because of other societal things, such as commitment to marriage or commitment to a relationship or commitment to whatever. And that can be very legitimate, and I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm saying often that if it is a question of your physical or your psychological survival, then which is more important to you? You really have to ask that question sometime. If I stay in this situation, will I be able to physically and psychologically survive and recover and live my life fully? Or do I just choose to go look somewhere else for that kind of having my needs met in that way? You see. It's just a matter of common sense often. When you stop and ask yourself the questions that you really are very commonsensical questions. It's like a lady said to me recently in a therapy session. She said, well, okay, why do I go on this way? All right? She was talking about the fact that she'd been going on for a very long time, being very unhappy and not getting her needs met by the man she's living with. And the answer was very complex in some respects. But basically, it's like this. Survival requires a great deal of energy. It requires a great deal of attention. The daily process of survival is a constant thing. We have to go to work, we have to make our money, we have to eat, we have to do all the things that we normally do. And if you look at it, if you will, like a stream of consciousness, all right? Look at that like a river that your awareness is floating on, all right? And imagine that you're on a raft on this river. And the only thing that preoccupies and takes a lot of your energy, really, is keeping this raft afloat. It's just keeping it afloat. And that takes a lot of energy, because that river's rough, right? It's a rough river. You've had to shoot some rapids, you've hit some rocks, maybe gone down a few waterfalls, and you've got to keep that raft afloat, right? And you're so busy keeping that raft afloat that you forget that there's a left bank and a right bank and an upstream. Or that if you paddled in a certain way or you did something else, you could maybe go off on another channel of the river. But you're so preoccupied with that process of survival, keeping the raft afloat. That's why I described it to this lady. That's why you have gone on this way. Because you have been so busy just keeping this raft afloat, you haven't been able to really see. And now I gave her a look at what was on either bank, what was upstream, or maybe some different channels that she could go down. And then she seemed to understand why you really do need to understand that a lot of times you go on that way because you don't know what else to do. Right? You really don't know what else to do. You're just so busy paddling away, keeping this raft afloat, that you don't stop and think about anything else. And if you do, quite often, somebody else says, hey, the raft's sinking. So immediately, quick, you got to come back to doing your share, right? How many times does that happen? You take a little time for yourself and somebody says, no, you, yeah. Right? So the whole thing is that you've got to learn, obviously you better be a better sailor. You've got to learn how to keep the raft afloat at the same time as being able to direct it and decide where it's going to go. Not just be so involved in that process. And that's what happens. The basic need, remember, is survival. That is basic. The one part gets tangled up with it because, as I said, in summary, all of the information that comes to you, you can have anything you want out there. The world is yours. You can get on a plane tomorrow morning, and in 12 hours you can be on the other side of the world, right? You can go into any store in Michigan if you have one of those little plastic cards, and you can buy anything your heart's content. But are you content? The contentedness comes from fulfilling the basic needs. Now, let me talk for a few moments about not just the physical needs, because you know what your body really needs to be healthy, don't you? I don't think anybody here has any questions about that. You all know quite a lot about nutrition and diet and, things like that. I don't need to talk about that. But do you know what your psyche needs? Do you know what your psychological department needs? I told you in the beginning. Anybody want to put it into words? That I'm special, at least to somebody? Why is that so hard to say? Yet how many times do you actually admit that to yourself? How many times do you say to somebody that you know loves you and that you love, I need you close to me right now? How many times do you say, look at a good job I did today? What do you think of that? By the same token, if he doesn't notice, you say, doesn't even notice the blooming thing I do. Alright? You want the recognition, but you don't want to ask for it. You think it's automatically forthcoming, and if it isn't, then there's something wrong with you. Or there's something wrong with your relationships or something, and that's not true. You have to be able to communicate needs to other people and to yourself. One lady I remember some time ago in a weight control seminar, I think it was, where she said that what it really boiled down to, one of her eating problems was the fact that she was not getting any affection from her husband. None at all, apparently. Was totally ignorant of her presence, as she claimed most of the time. And I talked to her about it, and I said to her, well, have you told him how you feel? Well, he should know. And I said, well, how should he know? She said, well, gosh, we've been married all these years. He should know what I need. And I said, did you ever tell him? She said, well, if he loves me, he would know these. I said, oh, I see. You think you married a mind reader. You can't expect other people to read your minds. I said, simply say to him, you know what I would need from now on? I need to be hugged once in a while or kissed once in a while. She said, well, I shouldn't have to ask him. I said, why not? Well, it's not the same. I said, what's the difference? If he hugs you because you asked him or he hugs you because you didn't. It's the same hug. She said, well, it's not quite the same thing. I said, well, go get one and find out. She came back the next week and found out that the hug you asked for feels exactly the same as the hug you didn't ask for. And when he turned around and said to her, the poor gentleman, after I don't know how many years of marriage, he says, well, why don't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me you need me to hug you like that? She says, well, you fool, you're supposed to have known. You have to find ways of meeting needs. Other people can't read your mind. They're too busy trying to keep their raft afloat too, you know. Maybe once in a while getting on the same raft wouldn't hurt. But you really do have to be able to communicate your needs. Not everybody is going to be able to be that observant or that sensitive all the time to your needs, any more than you are always that observant and that sensitive to other people's. Realize that. The people that often criticize other people for being insensitive are in their own way insensitive to others. So being sensitive to your own needs is very important. Being sensitive to how you need to get them met is also important. What do I need to do to meet my needs? And communication is a very big part of that. And there's lots and lots of ways of communicating. It's not just verbally, okay? You can do it with a touch. You can do it with a few written words. You can do it in lots and lots of different ways, a little gesture that you do, you see, that communicates to somebody that you're present and that you need the attention. How do you know, is there such a thing as an unselfish act? I hardly think so. Everything we do because it's going to come back to us in some way. That's why we do it. I'm not saying talking about it in terms of, oh, you're only doing it just to get the attention, but that's a very big part of it. You do it because you like to do it, you like to help people, or you like to give, or whatever, but it's still because you like to. And if you didn't like to, you wouldn't do it, and if you did it, if you didn't like to, you wouldn't like doing it, and it would show, right? So this is something you have to understand, is probably the best thing you can do for yourself with what we've talked about this evening, is to really get inside of you and communicate to yourself on a much different level about these kinds of things than you've ever done before. What do I want? What do I need? What's the difference? And how do I get these things taken care of? Okay? Any questions? Yes?
Do you think that people who are really famous or recognized in their field are there because they have a clear-cut definition of what they want and they need, and therefore they know how to go after it? I was reading about Mary Cunningham specifically, and I thought it was interesting that when she was growing up, even when she was a teenager, she knew exactly what she wanted. She had her future mapped out, and she would also write down her options and the way she could get it. And, you know, a lot of people don't even think about doing that, but it worked for her.
Yeah. The question is, you know, whether people who've reached success have always known how to get it and known that they wanted it and known how to get it. I think in many cases that's true. Because if you look at a lot of the cases of people who really reach the peak level of success in their career, whatever it is, they have done all the necessary things as a rule to get there. Usually they started at the bottom somewhere. But there's also exceptional cases where a person is discovered to have a particular talent or fill a particular need for somebody else, and therefore they become famous for that. But I think that, I'll go back to what I said before, when it is a true need, the person keeps striving until it's met. If it's something you just want, you see, like I want to be a movie star kind of thing, that if you just don't strive for that, then of course you're not going to be a movie star unless you get one of those lucky kind of deals, you see. I think that the whole idea is that whole pressure that comes from within yourself to meet that need, whatever it is. If it's a need to be an artist, a need to be a teacher, a need to be anything, you see, that is something that is fairly basic. And those needs can change, because this has happened many, many times. A person in their early youth may not know exactly what they want or what they can do. There's for many people, there was such a thing as, we've all heard of the late bloomers, haven't we? Okay, the people who didn't seem to do anything with the early part of their lives, and all of a sudden they just become something special. They grow and they develop and they learn and they become tremendous initiators of something or success at something. So I think that those things can change. It depends on the individual. Also, it depends, I think, a lot on the kind of support that you have for that. If you have a need to do something, okay, to fulfill what many people would consider their destiny, say, that I really was meant to do such and such, if you don't get the support, it may take you a very much longer time to do it. If you do get the support, it often is easier. However, by the same token, there are many people who do it in spite of, you see. So you have to look at the whole picture of the individual and say, when did you decide that you needed this or wanted this for yourself? You see, this is why I'm saying look at people who have been successful and see whether it took them a while to make the decision that I want to do this or I want to do that or I need to do this or that. There are some people that from very early childhood, like you say, in this particular case, a person just knows exactly what they want. They know that they need this in order to be fulfilled in life, and they just go after it, you see. And they never get deviated. But I think there's a lot of times in life that we can get deviated from that because of other things. I know many people that I've worked with who started out maybe in college and then towards a particular goal, got married, had a family, couldn't get back to college, had to wait until the family grew up and got away, and then they go back to college and decide that's not what I want to do anymore, there's something else I want to do, you see. So I think that it really depends on the individual and the circumstances the individual has to face as they go along. I don't know, a lot of people will tell you, but for example, my husband, okay, is I think a good example of this, because from the earliest possible times, he always wanted to be a photographer. From the time he was a real little kid, all right? And he just did. He just always managed to do that. And now, to get him to get a camera in his hand, I mean, he spent many years as a professional photographer. He's an award-winning photographer. He's done a lot of things in the field. But, you know, if you put it up to him, he said he's had it up to here with photography, and he's no longer interested because he got deviated. I deviated, as a matter of fact. But the point is that it may reach a point where it no longer feels the need. And then you have to find something else that fills the need. I've met many, I'm sure you've all met many people who've changed professions at midlife. Just suddenly just turned around and done something else. because what they're doing no longer fulfills them. And many, many, many times we see this in cases of, for example, where a person reaches the epitome of success and then it's an anticlimax because they have struggled so hard to get there that all the energy that went into getting to where they wanted to go or where they needed to go, and they get there and then they get and look at it and say, oh, so what? Is this all there is, kind of thing? And then there's a kind of letdown because too much energy went into getting there instead of just enjoying the trip, And I think that's part of it. Then many times I've worked with, I had a gentleman come all the way in from New York, as a matter of fact, by referral from another client. He sat in my office and he's a multi-millionaire, can do anything he wants to do. And he sat in my office and he said, Elaine, he said, I'm lost. I'm absolutely lost. He said, I can do anything I want to. He said, I can go anywhere in the world I want to go. I can buy anything I want to buy. He says, no, I'm lost. I don't, it doesn't have that nice sting it used to have, you see. Because what was happening for him, that all the time that he was striving to become this person was what was the need. The need was, in his case, to strive, not to succeed. And now he succeeded, so what? And he said to me, what shall I do? Oh, we had a very nice long talk. I've also had the same thing with a gentleman who in his own right had become the best in the world. Okay, he was a diamond or a gem appraiser, okay, and he was hired by the American government to appraise King Faisal's jewels, okay, before he died, and that's being the top, all right. And he's sitting in my office and he's saying, I'm bored. Okay. See, this is why I'm saying that immediately the need starts being met, the satisfaction begins to creep in. And so there has to be, this is why I think that if we could train people, like we train you in the mind mastery, to take the effort out, to just do it, so that every step of the way is the joy of doing it rather than just hurrying up and getting it done so I can say it's done. Or to reach this goal up here, there's a very ancient story, which I will close this lecture with, that goes this way. It's a story of an old master teaching a young man to be, I guess you would consider to be a new master, and of teaching him meditation and a whole lot of different things in the old tradition. And at one point the young man goes to the master and he says, Master, he says, I feel my progress is very slow. He said, I would like some counsel. He said, if I were to spend an extra hour or so a day in my studies, how soon then would I reach my goal? And the master contemplated for a while, and he considered it, and he turned to the student and he said, well, probably another year, my son. So the student went away somewhat perplexed, because before it was only going to take 6 months, you see. And he went away perplexed and he thought, oh, I see. So the next day or so he came back to the master and he said, Master, if I were to study an extra 3 hours a day, how soon then would I reach my goal? And the master contemplated for a due period of time and then reported to the student, probably in a couple of years, my son. So the student feels very, very much befuddled at this point and goes away and thinks, well, I don't know, maybe the master wants something very special from me. So he thinks about it and he goes back to the master and he says, Master, if I were to spend all my waking hours studying, how soon then would I reach my goal? And the master said, probably about 5 years, my son. So this really boggled the student, and he went back to his cell and he just really meditated on it and he really thought on it, and he said, ah. And he went back to the master and he said, Master, if I were to spend all of my waking hours and deny myself sleep, how soon then will I reach my goal? And the Master said, never, my son.